Hello and welcome to the Brutal Iron Gym podcast, where our goal is to cut through the BS and deliver the brutal truth about topics related to health and happiness. So today's topic is nutrition, and we're going to discuss nutritional experiments. And the point, kind of the end goal of this podcast, is to empower you to question what you experience or know in regards to nutrition, and don't settle for things that you don't like. Okay? So, we'll get into the first little story here. So, I was talking with a trainer recently, a good friend, and he was telling me how he had experimented with cereal. So, he had been having cereal as kind of like a quick and easy carb source before his workout and actually after his workout. So, we've talked about in a past podcast about meal timing. Okay, and if you want to check that out, it's podcast 249. And what that would be in regards to was the right time to have easily digestible carbohydrate sources. So in a sense that if I want to run my car, I have to put gasoline in my car. Okay, we kind of know that. So if I want to run my body, I have to have fuel in my body. Now, there are foods digest at different rates. So some foods digest slow, some foods digest fast. So if I want to have fuel in my body ready to use, and I'm only eating an hour before the workout, then I want to have food that would be digested and ready to be used within an hour, right? Whereas if I have to have that meal, say 3 hours before my workout, so maybe you have lunch, you have kind of like a snack around 2 or 3, and then right after work you work out around, say, 5 or 6. So at that 2 or 3 o'clock is when you'd have like calories that you're hoping will be there for your workout. So you would want to select foods that digested in kind of a 3 to 4 hour range, so that way they were usable at the time of the workout. So picking foods that will be digestible and ready to be used when you want them is incredibly important. Otherwise, it's like putting fuel in your car and having it all burn away or evaporate away, and then all of a sudden you go try to drive and there's no fuel left. So that would be like if you ate at noon and you're not working out till 6, but the activities and stuff you did from noon to 6 used up all that food, and then all of a sudden you'd show up in the evening for the workout and have no energy and be dead. So then you over-rely on caffeine-based supplements, then you can't fall asleep, and then you're tired the next day, then you have more caffeine. It's a big vicious cycle. So getting meal timing correct is a huge component in terms of not only just performance and results, but also how you feel. So there's a lot behind when you eat what you eat. Okay? So he wanted to experiment with cereal in the sense of trying to figure out the best type for him to have in the sense of what results he wanted for it. So I'm going to skip some of the details so we can kind of get through the story quicker. But one of the cereals he was having had canola oil in it. And a lot of kind of nutritional people in my, it's not my industry because I don't own the industry, but a lot of nutritional people in the fitness industry, well, actually probably not even a lot. At least someone in the nutritional industry is aware that a lot of canola oil can potentially cause gut problems. So some people know that, they're more sensitive to it, so therefore they've been kind of more aware of it before other people would. And one of those people is Stan Efferding. So S-T-A-N, Stan. Efferding is E-F-F-E-R, Efferding, E-F-F-E-R-D-I-N-G. Okay, so Stan Efferding, he incredibly smart dude, knows a lot about nutrition. So if you've never heard of him, look him up on YouTube. So his name is Stan Efferding. He has a diet called the vertical diet. I'm not promoting that you buy it or become like a worshiper of him or anything, but he has a lot of good information and just somebody you want to check out. So if you're looking for nutrition information from someone who's been there, done that. So he's a professional bodybuilder. He set world records in powerlifting. He looks freaking jacked as hell and he's super lean. So he knows healthy nutrition, like how to have people have good blood work. But he also knows nutrition to make you feel good, look good, perform well. So a lot of times people get their nutrition advice from somebody who maybe has a nutrition degree, but they have absolutely no experience working with athletes. And if you are an athlete, you don't want that. You want somebody who knows you. Okay? So Stan Efferding's a smart dude. and he has a sensitivity to canola oil. So my friend who's a trainer was aware of Stan Efferding and aware of his issue with canola oil and wanted to increase the cereal he was eating, but found when he increased the cereal to have the calories he wanted to have pre-workout and post-workout, he had some gut distress. So he looked in his cereal, there was canola oil in it, so he figured, hey, maybe I can experiment and get a cereal that doesn't have canola oil and see if then when I have my increased amounts that I would like to have, if I can avoid the gut distress. So he experimented. He went out and found a rice-based cereal, and he found a wheat-based cereal that didn't have canola oil. So he went ahead and experimented. He found out that the rice-based cereal digested really well. It was kind of bland, didn't have the greatest flavor, but it had no gut distress. He could eat as much as he wanted. He then tried the wheat-based cereal and found out that having too much of that did cause digestive stress. So he might have a gluten sensitivity, or just basically that's too much bran and fiber and stuff to digest in a short period of time in which he was eating it. So within like a 3 or 4 hour span. So he experimented and found that the gut distress he was having from wanting to increase his cereal amounts to help him grow bigger muscles wasn't necessary. He didn't have to live with that gut distress. So if he switched to a rice-based cereal that didn't have canola oil, he could eat as much as he wanted and he wouldn't have to worry about the gut distress. So that's a pretty damn good experiment. So previously, without having done that experiment, he would have had to think to himself was, oh man, I'd like more calories so I can grow bigger, but every time I have more calories, my gut gets distressed and I don't feel good. So he would have had to choose in his mind between feeling good versus having bigger muscles, and that's a sucky choice. So for us meatheads, that's not really a choice. You're going to have the gut distress and you're going to take the big muscles. Okay? So it was nice for him, though, to be able to experiment and find out how he could still accomplish his goal of big muscles, but now not have to deal with the gut distress. So I've done experiments in this way like a bajillion times myself over the years. And one that I've talked about here and there in the podcast, but it's worth re-mentioning, was I actually did an experiment once with carbohydrates where I wanted to see what was the best digested source of carbohydrates for me that not only had digestive ease, but also had really good sustainable energy throughout the day. Okay? So I spent 8 weeks with the only carb source I was having was oatmeal. Now, my body did not like oatmeal. It didn't process it that well. I had a little bit of gut cramps and just didn't feel great on it. I felt like I had absolutely no energy from it whatsoever. But I tried it for 8 weeks because that was the parameters that I set in my mind when I started. So I'm a stubborn son of a gun. So even though I felt like shit, and I knew within the first week that it was a horrible choice, I still did the stupid 8 weeks. So, ugh. But, so I found out that my body did not process oatmeal well. So it processed it. I broke it down, I got energy from it, but my body didn't like breaking it down. I had gut cramps, gut distress, and I didn't get really good energy. I kind of felt tired all the time and just kind of worn out. So I didn't feel like a good, strong athlete. Then I went for 8 weeks eating sweet potato because it was something that, I'd heard was a good food, good, healthy food. And I found that there was no gut distress. So yay, thank God for that. And I had better energy, but it still wasn't amazing energy. And then what I found the issue was with sweet potato is I was full so much throughout the day that I struggled to get in the calories that I needed to get for my goal of growth. So sweet potato digested well. I had okay energy, but I couldn't freaking eat enough because I was stuffed all day. So it wasn't processing fast enough that I would feel like eating again by the next time I was supposed to eat. So I was struggling to get my calories in that I was supposed to have while I was eating sweet potato. So with oatmeal, I had gut distress and I had no energy. With sweet potato, I had no gut distress. I had okay energy, but man, it was force feeding all the time. Then I switched to jasmine rice for 8 weeks, and it was like, like the light shines down from heaven, the clouds part, all. So it was wonderful. So thank you, jasmine rice. My body processed it super fine. I was hungry for my next meals all the time. I had great energy. So it felt like I was freaking taking a drug at that point because I had spent the last 16 weeks feeling not so good. So jasmine rice has turned out to be my best carb source. Now, do I have other carb sources throughout the day? Yes. So I've talked about it before. I drink a lot of whole milk to help me get the calories. I drink sweet tea throughout the day because I'm a fatty and it doesn't bother me much. So that's the beautiful thing about being 280 pounds is your body burns through a lot of calories. And the beautiful thing about being a psycho who trains more often than you probably should, it burns through calories as well. So I can have 200 or 300 calories or more of sweet tea every day, and it doesn't really make me that fat. So yay for me. So I have those carb sources, and I'll every once in a while, like I'll eat, like lunch meat bagel sandwiches. So I'll have bagels for my carb source. But my main carb source that I eat like every night before I go to bed, and it's the one I turn to when I want to have my best performance, is jasmine rice. So I did that experiment. So 8 weeks was definitely excessive, but it made it very definitive for me. So I don't regret using 8 week increments, but was 8 weeks totally necessary? Probably not. However, in the span of 24 weeks, okay, so roughly half a year, I was able to find out for the entire rest of my life what was the best carb source for me, what made me feel the best, digested the best. I was hungry, but not like starving to death. Like it was finding for me what was perfect. So it's kind of like the Goldilocks thing where, something's too cold, something's too hot, then you find out that it's just right. So I was able to find out what was just right for me, and now I have that for the rest of my entire life. I have that knowledge. So that's what I would encourage you to do. If you've never experimented nutritionally, there is an enormous, enormous benefit that you're missing out on. Okay? So one of the things I think is interesting is when I first started experimenting with nutrition, it was back when I was like 16, 17 years old, and we actually didn't have the internet where I lived because I lived in apparently like 1940s. But it took me until I think I was a junior in high school, like 17, to get the internet. So what was the issue for me and why I had to experiment a lot when I was younger was because there was a lack of information available to me. So I lived kind of out in the country, and there wasn't a lot of people like you could talk to in person who really knew anything about nutrition. Absolutely no one knew anything about aesthetic nutrition. And there was very little, if any, knowledge about performance nutrition. It was like, eat a big bowl of pasta and spaghetti before the football game. That kind of like knowledge mindset. But it wasn't, they didn't know really that great of information about that. And it's not a knock on anybody in my area. They didn't have access to anything either. So kind of just, that's the way it was. So I would get Muscle and Fitness magazine every month. I would read the magazine the first day I got it and then spend the other 29 days waiting until the next one came out. So I had to do a lot of experimenting because I wanted to learn at a faster rate than I could find information. So I had to experiment. I had to try things of my own so I could gain knowledge. And it was because of a lack of information. In today's culture, there is too damn much information. Now, I recognize the irony of me making a podcast just adds to the amount of information that's out there, okay? So I'm in a way contributing to the problem. But hopefully my information will give some clarity on the rest of the information. So that's actually what we're in now, is when I grew up, it was an age of lack of information. And in today's age, it's an age of misinformation or an age of lack of clarity. So often there are people who mean well when they give advice, write an article, or write a book. But when you span out and you look at the bigger picture of what they're writing, or if you're looking at it with maybe a greater degree of education, you can see how pigeonholed the information is. How they're presenting it as a global truth, but in no way in hell is that a global truth. It might have just been situational to them. They believe it now to be standard and true, and they present it to everybody else as a truth when it's not. So I don't, now I've gotten aggressive on people before in my language and stuff, And I maybe need to dial that down in the sense that I do honestly believe that 99% of people, when they make nutrition information, that they mean well. The downside is they don't know enough to know that they don't know things. So they maybe took a course, they have, 1 degree in this, they've done something to give them some information and sense of credibility. But they haven't been in it long term enough and seen enough variety of people to understand where their information fits in the grand scheme of things. Now, I've been a personal trainer for 17 years. I have a master's in nutrition, bachelor's in health and phys ed, which does have some nutritional background. So that's why I mentioned it. So there is some nutrition classes in health and phys ed programming. There's obviously a lot of nutrition classes in the master's of nutrition. But I'll be the first one to admit, and I've said this before, is a master's of nutrition, like a registered dietitian program, has, like the program I went through, we had 0 credits on aesthetic nutrition. How nutrition made you look. There was 0 information. None. We had 1 3-credit class on performance nutrition. And it was aerobic nutrition based at most. There was a very small section on anaerobic. And from what I've known going into that class, and what I know now even after that class, it was presented in not a really good way. So there was a lot of loopholes and misinformation, and just there was, dear God, you could make a whole, like 2-year degree out of just performance nutrition. You can make a whole 2-year degree out of just aesthetic nutrition. So most of the program of a master's in nutrition, registered dietitian stuff, focused on health nutrition. So how do you feed somebody so their blood work turns out well? That does not mean that they're going to look good. Not in any way. And it absolutely does not mean that they're going to perform well. So aesthetic nutrition, how you look based on how you eat, and performance nutrition, how you perform based on how you eat, are extremely different forms of nutritional knowledge compared to general health nutrition. They are vastly, vastly, vastly different. So it's important that we know that. And it's important that we have some awareness in those, differences. So that way, when we hear information, we can say to ourselves, well, is this general health? That might not mean that it applies to aesthetic health. Or if this is performance health, is that going to make me healthy? So does the information of one area relate well to the other 2 areas? So you always want to keep that in mind. And what I was saying in regards to my background was I've been personal trained for 17 years. I've been master's in nutrition, bachelor's in health and phys ed. Actually taught at the university level for 7 years. I have well over 1,000 clients. I stopped counting at 1,000 because it was kind of pointless. I've done this for a long time, So I have 17 years experience. But every damn day I am learning more information and finding out more about what I don't know. So hopefully in another 17 years, I can look back and say, okay, a lot of what I was saying was true, but maybe here's some added details. Here's some extra little things to put in the cracks. Here's where this fits and that fits. So hopefully I continue to increase my knowledge. But I will say for myself that with 17 years of knowledge and those degrees in education and experience, that what I know today is pretty damn good. So I've gotten people in terms of aesthetic nutrition. I've helped people earn pro cards, which is like the pinnacle of what you would need to know for aesthetic nutrition. For performance nutrition, in regards to strength, I've helped people set national records. So which is kind of like a pinnacle level, like a top level of nutritional knowledge that you would need for that field. So I've proven that what I know works, at the upper levels. So I do feel confident enough to make this podcast. However, I hope that I come across as humble enough to recognize that I still need to learn as well. So when I knock on other people who maybe post things or publish things or write things, that when you read them with higher degrees of experience and education, you're like, oh dear God, that's horrible advice. I recognize that they mean well and they're trying. But it's unfortunate that what they don't know negatively impacts their readers, and therefore you guys are getting information that isn't crystal clear in how it fits specifically for you. So that's what I mean by an age of lack of clarity. So I was in an age of lack of information when I started. We are now in an age of lack of clarity. There's too damn much information. Nobody has it in order, and nobody has like a priority list of it. It's hard to know where does one thing fit, where does another not. Okay? And that's what I'm hoping to simplify with these podcasts. That's why I don't mind repeating myself. So I'll make podcasts that tell you calories are the most important thing to know. I've said that 40 million times. That's not going to change because that absolutely is the most important thing to know. I'm not going to change the answer. That's the answer. So I'll beat a dead horse if that horse still needs beat, okay? So what I want to continue to do is to give clarity of information to the point where even if you get annoyed with me, it's going to become beaten into your head of what is the best information. You might not like it, okay? And chances are you won't, but you're going to know what it is at least, okay? So getting back to the idea of experimentation with nutrition, I think that's why it's extremely important for people nowadays to still experiment. So I experimented because I needed to learn faster. Now it's good to experiment because you need to find clarity. You need to find out of what is said to be true, what is true for you. So for some people, like the trainer at the beginning of the story, his stomach was bothered by canola oil under a certain amount. At over a certain amount, I guess. And his stomach was bothered by wheat cereal over a certain amount. You need to find, is that important for you? So if you're eating foods and you're getting gut distress, and you say, hey, you know what? I've never considered canola oil. Let me look and see of what I'm eating has canola oil in it. And you might find what you eat has a lot of canola oil. So if you experiment and pull away the canola oil and you feel better, that is extremely helpful to know. So that way you don't have to live in gut distress and think that that's normal or think that your body's broken and there's something wrong with you. Same thing with gluten sensitivity. So a lot of people make fun of people being gluten intolerant or gluten sensitive. And actually, it's pretty damn true. Like there are a lot of people who have sensitivities, irritations to gluten. So they might not have like the biggest and worst responses, like extreme gut cramping, hives, and a whole bunch of other crazy shit that can happen to people. But you might have some light bloating. You might have some lethargy, like lack of energy after a meal, and just be like, ugh, I just kind of don't feel good. I wonder why. And it's a not feeling good that you can put up with. But it doesn't have to be something you have to live with. And that's what I would promote you to do. So, if you're having any kind of nutritional issues, it's good to experiment around them. Okay? So, how do we test? Here's some guidelines real quick. So, the first thing you want to do is, of the things you're not experimenting with, keep them as consistent as freaking possible. So, in the trainer story, he was experimenting with his pre-workout and post-workout with a cereal. He kept his pre-workout supplement the same. He kept his post-workout protein shake the same. He kept his breakfast the same. He kept the rest of his meals throughout the day the same. He didn't change anything in his nutrition except for the cereal. Therefore, he had more clarity about if there was any differences happening, what were those differences related to. So when I've helped people with different digestive disorders, so diverticulitis, Crohn's disease, and blah, 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 we've had to do elimination-based diets, and then we had to do kind of rebuilding diets to where we might pick, say, 3 protein sources, 3 carb sources, and 3 fat sources. We get them eating those on a regular basis, and we find a combination of those things that they feel good and feel consistently okay with. Then we try to add in 1 new thing a day and see how they feel. If they feel gut distress from it, we take it back out. We go back to the things that we knew felt good for 3 days. Then we try again. Depending on the level of irritation, sometimes we'd have to wait 5 days or even 7 days. So there's a whole bunch of science behind that kind of diet. But the idea is we would keep everything the same except for the one thing we want to experiment with. So it's very important that you do that. Otherwise, you won't know if you're experiencing changes, what those changes are coming from, what's causing those changes. Now, part of this, in order to be consistent, is to understand at what season of life are you in right now. So if you're thinking, man, this podcast sounds good, and now I'm questioning my timing of making this podcast for what I'm about to say. But if you're like, man, this podcast sounds good, I think I'm going to try that. But all of a sudden we're coming up to Thanksgiving, or we're coming up to Christmas. So if you want to keep everything consistent, then all of a sudden on Thanksgiving weekend, you eat like a jackass and you eat everything under the sun and you eat a whole bunch of weird, crazy foods. That's going to undo your experiment. So you have to recognize at what season of life am I in? If I want to experiment something for a week, am I able to be consistent this week? Or do I have a vacation coming up? Or do I have a work trip coming up? Or is there an event coming up? So you have to recognize what season of life you're in and make sure you plan ahead so you can have the consistency that you need. Okay? The other thing you need to do is you need to control the variables. So for example, when I did my experiment with oatmeal versus sweet potato versus jasmine rice, I was changing my carb sources, but I made sure that I ate the exact same number of calories among each source. So if I did 8 weeks of, say, 2,000 calories coming from oatmeal, when I switched to sweet potato, I had to still eat 2,000 calories worth of sweet potato. When I switched to jasmine rice, I had to still eat 2,000 calories worth of jasmine rice. So whatever the number was per day. So that way, if I had no energy when I was eating oatmeal, because I was really only eating 1,500 calories, and then by the time I got to the jasmine rice, I was so hungry by then, I was eating like 3,000 calories. No wonder I'd feel better and have more energy. So you have to control the variables within what you're experimenting with. And that would be calories, and you can even, depends on what type of experiment you're doing, of course, would change the parameters. But with most experiments nutritionally, you're going to have calories at least as one of the parameters you're going to want to control. Okay, one of the variables. So we want to have consistency in everything else. So we know that the only thing changing is the thing we want it to. So therefore, whatever changes we experience, we can contribute to the change that we're making intentionally. We want to control as many variables as we can so that we're not getting a false sense of difference because we're actually missing a variable that's causing the difference. Then you want to journal it. Don't remember it. Okay, write it, don't remember it. So don't be like, well, I remember on Monday I felt like this. Write it down, okay? So write it down physically with your hand and a writing utensil. Write it down, okay? Because it's going to make a huge difference. So this annoys the shit out of me when I work with people who have certain nutritional disorders and issues. And I'll ask them, like, how was Monday? Well, I don't really remember what I had for breakfast. It's like, damn it, anyhow, this is what we're working on. That's why you're paying me money. Write this shit down. So I get mad because it's just they're missing an opportunity to make their life better. All they had to do was take 1 minute to write down the damn day, and they could have that information for the rest of their life and have the benefit. If they don't write it down, we don't know what we're getting, and we might have to redo the experiment, or we're going to get false results, and they might still have the misery thing that they're having to deal with for the rest of their freaking life. So that's why I get frustrated sometimes. But writing it down helps you. You have too many other things to remember in your life. You don't need to add this. Just write it down so that we have a journal of how you felt and what was going on at the time. You can recall and look back on that and say, man, every freaking day it seems like right around 10 a.m. I'm actually not feeling good. I never really put that together because, on Mondays I do this at 10 a.m., Tuesdays I do that. I don't really have consistency, but I found out that actually among my inconsistent activity, there's actually a consistent feeling that I'm having that I wasn't paying attention to. So journaling things helps you recognize patterns that maybe you are not recognizing that currently exist. Okay? Cool. So that would be some things to keep in mind when you're testing, is keep everything as consistent as possible around what you're experimenting with. Control as many variables as you can that you're aware of, so that way whatever experiences you're getting, you know what they're contributing to. Journal everything so that way you can actually see patterns that exist. And then you can research, you can find related information, but trust your body's response over an article or a book. So if your body's telling you this thing feels good, but a book says it doesn't, I would trust your body. Or if your body tells you, this thing sucks, I don't like this, don't do this, but a book says you should do it, listen to your body. So that's the whole idea of experimenting, is to find out what's true for you. Now, if you feel like you might be having a health risk or maybe there's some issue, you can consult with an expert, but pick an expert who knows exactly what you are. So if you are a strength athlete, female, go ask somebody who's worked with female strength athletes. If you're a male who does CrossFit, go work with somebody who works with males who do CrossFit. So don't just pick some random nutritionist who doesn't have experience with what you are. If you're an athlete, talk to somebody who works with athletes. If you're not an athlete, then that's okay. You can talk to somebody who doesn't work with athletes. But you gotta get the information that pertains exactly to you. So if you're going to ask an expert, ask an expert in your area, not just some general broad-based expert. Okay? Cool. Okay. So the idea of this is to push you to make sure that food works for you. You do not have to live miserable. If you have something going on nutrition-wise that is reducing the quality of life for you, you don't have to live with that. You can do something about it, okay? So get into some experiments, figure some stuff out, read some research if you can find it. If you have some things you want to experiment with but you're not sure how, you can email us. Our email is brutalironGym@gmail.com, and we'll help you out, okay?